What's going on, my broskiis? My name is Toadski, back again, here to bring you guys yet another One Piece Treasure Cruise video with Grand Party, day number 3, and in this one, this was a little bit of a scarier day, because, it's specifically Match 2. Match 1 is pretty straightforward, nothing really too crazy here, as we do have a quick team in Game 1, we see a Dex team in Game 3, so I feel pretty comfortable that I can kind of get through, even if I don't even have to use a burst on one of those two fights. But of course, we get through it pretty comfortably, no issues whatsoever, so that's pretty cool. But, you know, a lot of people are still opting to use the strategy, of course, Gear 5 leader, and then once you're finished for the day, you can go ahead and change your leader to something else. Of course, once again, I will go ahead and showcase at the end of the video me changing my leader, just to show you guys that, you know, we're going to continue this strategy. And also towards the end of this video, there's going to be a new red ticket that you guys can have a look at after I was able to get some more rewards for beating all of these matches for the day. So that's pretty cool. But of course, this health cut team is working pretty well, but it's not very good defensively, so you can find yourselves in very weird situations where sometimes you just can't get your burst to pop off, and if that does happen and you take quite a few hits, it can be pretty scary, so you do have to be very careful of that. This secondary team here is just going to be a quick team, and I opted to use my Free Spirit team against it, and despite the fact that quick have all of the best buffs this season, you know, Free Spirit still handles it quite comfortably. However, I will admit this quick team that we're up against isn't the most optimal quick team in this season, as of course it doesn't have some of those key rare recruits, and they're also using Sugar on the front line, which is understandable if my opponent opted to use this team against a strength team, but against anything that isn't strength, like, it just doesn't matter at all. You know, Sugar is kind of a pointless unit, honestly, and the rest of the units are pretty stock standard, so nothing really too crazy, I would say. You know, you got Blue Jam on there, you've got Akainu, you know, just the typical suspects. But I'll leave you guys with the rest of this clip, and we'll pick things up with match number 2. Now, match number 2 was pretty scary, as we actually come up against a MAGMA KAIDO GP leader, Dex team at the front, and then we see a strength team as number 2. However, I was a little concerned about my opponent's GP skill. You know, obviously the team that I'm using here, the health cut team, as I mentioned at the start, it's not a very good defensively focused team. And the way that the opponent uses their GP burst is that they have to tank 60,000 damage. So basically, once I'm able to launch my Gear 5 burst, my opponent is pretty much able to launch their MAGMA KAIDO skill. So we have to be careful about that, because it does actually do a pretty sizable amount of damage. Nowhere near the levels of what Gear 5 is capable of doing, but still something that is quite scary, especially when you're running a team that isn't very bulky or defensively minded, such as the team that I am using right here. And we get kind of shafted here. We take lots of damage, we get a few KOs on key characters, and we just really, I'm kind of struggling to get my burst skill. Like, I have the full bar pretty much there, but I'm just short on a little bit of damage. I end up skipping, and my opponent does end up using their burst, which does mean that we lose that first game of the match. So at that point, I was a little concerned. I believe on this day I had maybe one more reset. I can't remember when you lose your resets, but yeah, I was a little concerned. So going into the strength fight, I felt okay. I was a little concerned just because MAGMA KAIDO is just a really good character. However, one thing about this opponent's team is the fact that I didn't see the Film Red Luffy, at least not on the front line anyway, which is a pretty big thing, because that Film Red Luffy can add so much damage to strength. The damage through defense is just absurd. So I felt pretty good that my opponent didn't have that on their front line, so that was pretty good. But I was a little concerned about also the Kizuna Boa Hancock, because you can get just kind of RNG'd, and if you get really unlucky, that can cause problems. But luckily for us, we do knock out the Kizuna Boa pretty comfortably there. We have our burst skill, so we opt to actually try and save the burst skill if possible, so that I can use it for the final game to try and claw back a victory here. If I don't have to use the burst skill, I would love to not do that. just to ensure that I can keep it for the third game. And luckily for us, we find ourselves in a good situation where we don't have to do it. So my opponent ends up getting their burst skill back. They use it against us, which does do pretty good damage. But luckily we can actually inch out a victory, which means that we can save that for the final game of this match, which is awesome. So I end up using my Dex team. Not really too sure what I could be coming up against here, whether it be, you know, like an opposing Dex team or something like that. But it actually ends up being a quick team, which is really good for us because, you know, my team doesn't really have too many problems with most quick teams. So that was fantastic. We got a little lucky, I'll admit, depending on what that last team could have been. Like, if this last team was like a slasher team or something like that, probably would have been pretty difficult to actually get a victory. But I guess it is all dependent on things, and the fact that we have the Gear 5 burst and my opponent doesn't, yeah, that really makes a huge difference for us, giving us a lot of leeway to itch out that victory. And now we can move on to the final match of the video, which for us is actually pretty straightforward as well. So we see that the first team is going to be a Dex team. The second team is going to be a health cut kind of slasher focus team with Jack on it for some reason. So I assume that there was a pretty good reason for my opponent doing that. And we can't see the third team, but pretty sure it was just going to be a free spirit team, most likely something with Gear 5 on it, right? So we go in first with the health cut team versus the opponent's Dex team, and this is typically what I do. However, because we are running a Kainu, like, he is a health cutting unit that has a lot of special CT on himself, it's definitely a lot better if you're up against a strength team. But strength, depending on what they have against this team that I currently use, yeah, that could definitely be really bad. But it is a little bit RNG focused. Like, if my opponents are running that full power strength team, yes, a Kainu is really good for applying lots of pressure to my opponent there. But also we can get kind of stuffed if my opponent's able to use the right skills at the right time, or if characters whiff, for example, like characters like Pell targeting the wrong character, or characters like Who's Who that you can just whiff. You know, there's the potential for all of that to happen, but so far it has been good. And now that I've mentioned it, I've probably jinxed myself for the upcoming days. But next we have here is going to be that weird slasher team with Jack on it. And I felt pretty comfortable so long as, you know, Whitebeard and Roger were able to get knocked out. That's the only thing I was kind of afraid of. Yes, my opponent does have King on the bench, but it is the last unit to come in, so depending on when that unit comes in, you know, what's KO'd at the time, I feel pretty good. We do have our burst skill ready to go, and I know that most characters on my opponent's side of the field are not going to be able to tank that, especially after a little bit of damage is chipped away from them, especially when you have Gear 5 with expanded limit break. Level 150, it does make a big difference with the amount of damage you can get from that GP burst skill there. As we proc it here and we get a sizable 13k damage that goes through defense, it's just the most broken thing in the game. It's so insane. But that's going to wrap it up for me for day 3. Thank you so much for watching the video, guys, and if you guys did enjoy it, make sure to go ahead and leave a like. And if you want to stay up to date with all the content that I post, including more One Piece Treasure Cruise content, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. And that, guys, I'll see you guys within the next video.
No!